Offense, offense, offense. We flip our season in review series to the hitters. First up, infielders and catchers. Welcome back in another episode of the Bleav in Mets podcast. That's Jack McKessie. I'm Chris Schubert here with you talking all things New York Mets baseball. As I mentioned in the top, we're doing our season in review series. If you're just hopping in now in the middle and you want to catch back up, we've done starters and relievers. We did everybody on the pitching side last week in those two episodes. This week, hitters. First up, the catchers and the infielders. Later on in the week, the outfielders, and then our best and worst moments of the year coming to you next week. Jack, infielders, best way to do this, I think, just go around the diamond. What do you say?
I'm with you, Chris. Let's do it.
Let's start with the catchers. Do we go with the guy who started more games at the catcher spot? Luis Torrens, 93 games. Francisco Alvarez played in 76 games. Can't forget Hayden Senger and the 33 games that he played in as well. That made up the catching group for the New York Mets in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, a mixed bag for sure. And Luis Torrens, I think, is a good place to start for this group.
So when it comes to Torrens, I think just what's the phrase that I'm looking for here? I think the steady Eddie way that Luis Torrens was able to just play catcher when we were dealing with the volatile swings of Francisco Alvarez. Alvarez missing time because of injury, meaning that Hayden Senger needed to come up and be the backup catcher. Torrens went into that role as the starter and was everything that the Mets could have asked for and more, not only offensively but defensively. And I do think that's an important note to bring up here when talking about these catchers. They were a huge part of this Mets team defensively. And elsewhere, the defense was a problem. It was not a problem behind the plate, throwing out runners. They were just excellent at it. And Torrens was a centerpiece of that, started the most games, had that offense that we talked about, but also provided so much defensively and being able to call a game behind the plate with starters. And then for Alvarez, it was a case of getting hurt, coming back, and then just being all over the place, getting sent down. And when he gets sent down, you're just worried that, man, is he going to be able to reach his potential? Is he going to be able to finally put it all together? He gets called back up from his time down in the minors where he absolutely tore the cover off the ball and made the Mets they had no choice but to call him back up. And the only thing that stopped him after that was the injuries, and he didn't even let those stop him because he came back from those and was great as well.
Yeah, it was a crazy season from those two guys. I think Luis Torrens, watching these games throughout the year, I mean, not only was he excellent as far as the offensive filling in, I mean, the small power stretch that he had when Alvarez was down in AAA, or maybe it was after he got hurt, and he was hitting those 3-run homers and coming up the way a backup catcher should. It was very fun to watch. And then to go 20 for 49 and throwing out base runners in a league where the emphasis on the stolen base has started to come back in recent seasons. Like, he is a guy that the opposing teams really had to think about if they wanted to run on Luis Torrens' arm. And then for Francisco Alvarez to come in and look as bad as he did for a lot of the season, and then to take a demotion like that with such maturity as a guy who is, again, like, also 22, and come back and be one of the best hitters on this Mets team by WRC plus and OPS plus, like, I am really excited to see what a full season of Francisco Alvarez is going to look like with the hitting adjustments that he made after his demotion, because the power was back. His capability of using all parts of the field was back. He just looked like the best version, the top version of the hitting prospect that the Mets expected when he was coming up originally 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think the encouraging sign is the way Alvarez finished the season and him finally showing signs of that potential all coming together. And the way he handled it, the class in which he handled it, and just how his confidence really never seemed to waver was the most encouraging sign out of things. and he finished the year with a 124 WRC plus. And I do know that there are some out there that wonder if he should be the starter next season. I think the best case right now for the Mets is, with Terren still under contract and Alvarez obviously still under team control, is you treat this very much like a hockey goalie situation where you just ride the hot hand, but most of the time it's going to be somewhat 50-50, because I think that's the best thing right now for both guys to give the Mets their best in 2026. And again, I know we're just wrapping up 2025. We'll do the 2026 content in the future. But with the way the season ended for Alvarez, it does feel like he has put himself in position to be the starting catcher on opening day of 2026.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also worth noting for Terrence too. Like, he was a guy that took a beating back there in terms of like stray bats, foul balls, and I remember there was one game that Steve Gelbs did a report that Luis Terrence had the mentality of, if I'm starting a game behind the plate, I am finishing the game no matter what. And you could tell, like, his ability to play through those 93 games and be, like you said, that steady Eddie when Alvarez was injured or in AAA, like that was huge for the Mets throughout the 2025 season.
And just to show you how close it was, Alvarez a 1.8 WAR in 2025, Luis Terrence a 1.6 WAR in 2025. So both
13.9 defensive WAR for Luis Terrence is outstanding, and I believe is the best of any Mets fielder in 2025. It is, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was excellent. The only person that was close defensively was Lindor on that side defensively. The first baseman, there's one guy really. There was some other guys who played first base, but they're not primary first basemen. We'll get to them when we get their positions. But it's Pete Alonso, the 38 home runs, the 272 batting average, a 141 WRC plus, the franchise all-time home run leader, had easily one of the best statistical years of his career, over 100 RBIs, hit 40 doubles. I mean, you know the numbers at this point. You watch the games. And in a year where Pete signed the 2-year deal to come back, everybody was focused on the home run chase to become the Mets' all-time franchise-leading home run hitter and wondering if he would play well enough to opt out of the deal. This was the Mets' second-best hitter behind Juan Soto this season, and he provided that protection for Juan. We'll talk about the defensive woes in just a second, but offensively, this is probably, I know there was the year he hit 50 home runs, 52 home runs as a rookie, but this is by far, I think, Pete's best year in his career.
Yeah, I think it's
he stole a base, Jack. He's got one stolen base as well.
It's a weird year for Pete, because I think it's like it was bookended by two really good stretches for him. The beginning of the season, he was playing at an MVP level. He looked like, bar none, the best hitter in the National League for March, April, and the early part of May. But then there was a stretch of like 90-ish games where he struggled heavily, and the home runs slowed down a little bit. The strikeouts started to inflate after he had avoided swinging at a lot of those down and out sliders for the early part of the season. And then he recovered for the end of the season and had a really nice back half that made him look more like an MVP level player again. We're not going to have the full Pete Alonso conversation right now. He has already said that he is opting out of the second year of his contract, and the Mets are currently without a clear first base option. But it's something the Mets are going to have to consider, is the up and down nature of the season that he had. Even though surface level, if you're looking at the big picture, it was the second best of any Mets hitter. It's just the unreliability for a full season of MVP level play is something that the Mets will have to ponder when they're considering re-signing him for 2026 and maybe beyond.
Yeah, the center of where things went wrong for the Mets was in July, post All-Star break, is where things really started to teeter. And in that month, Pete had a 51 WRC plus. He hit 141 with a 242 on base percentage and struck out 23.2% of the time, which wasn't his worst number of the year, but that month he really, really struggled for the team, and that's where things started to slide. And yeah, the Pete Alonso conversation, this is not the time and place. This is recapping 2025. We'll have the Pete Alonso conversation, but part of that conversation is the defense. And defensively, he was the worst rated player that the Mets had. So
him being on the quote unquote assist side of the play that knocked Kodai Senga out for a month or two is also worth noting. Like, there were several plays like that where Pete Alonso had to make a throw to first base, and an errant throw injured Kodai Senga. He had one throw that looked like it could have killed Edwin Diaz at one point. He is a guy that is well known for how good he is at preventing errors from his teammates. He has a very good scoop as a receiver at first base, but as far as fielding, as far as a guy who is taking the ball at his position and making and throwing the ball, it was a big struggle, especially in this year, noticeably for Alonso.
Let's go to second base, and I don't know what to do with Brett Beatty. I don't know what position to put him in. I think we'll get to him when we get to third base. So this is really just a Jeff McNeil conversation here. And it's weird because Jeff had a year this year in 25 that was better than his last 2 seasons. So it was certainly a return to form-ish for Jeff. But I think everyone's going to remember how bad September was. And It was a 53 WRC plus in September. He basically was unplayable after being a solidly above average hitter the first 5+ months of the season. In September, it was so hard to watch him be just a nothing out there. Now, he does provide you a ton of versatility. Played 79 games in second base, played 34 in center, 10 in left, played 7 in right, played 2 at first base, paid 10 at DH. Like, he played all over the diamond and was basically, to throw it back, the Mets version of Ben Zobrist, being able to play basically everywhere on the diamond for them. And it was a better year. The 111 WRC plus, you have to go back to, I think it was 2021 for a year that's anywhere close to that for Jeff McNeil. But unfortunately, it's the way that it ended that I think is going to bother a lot of people.
Yeah, we went into this season kind of expecting Jeff McNeil to be in his maybe last season with the Mets because of all of the young guys that the Mets had to try to get at-bats for, not just Brett Beatty, who played a lot of second base this year, but also Luis Angel Acuna, who we'll talk about, Ronnie Mauricio coming back from his knee injury. So to have that be your kind of swan song in September is a far cry from maybe what Pete Alonso looked like in 2024, where he had a September and October to remember. Jeff McNeil's most recent outings with the Mets are a much sourer taste than he might have hoped as a guy that is kind of on the bubble for the 2026 roster.
Do you want to put Brett Beatty here, or do you want to put him at third base?
I think we can get him at third base. I think Mauricio and Acuna maybe are better second base fits.
He played more. Brett played more games at third base. He played 87 at third. He played 57 at second. So I guess we can get to him when we get to the third baseman. We can talk about Luis Angel Acuna and Mauricio, 2 young players that were just kind of looking for opportunities. In the case of Acuna, he provided the speed, he provided the defense. I don't think he hit well enough to keep himself in the lineup every day. And then as for Mauricio, I think they rushed him up because they needed offense. They needed somebody to provide a spark there at third base because Beatty and Vientos were both kind of struggling. And so Mauricio was tearing the cover off the ball. Okay, we'll give you a chance. And then he not only struggled, but I think the Mets needed him around because he provided good defense and they wanted the lefty bat, that they couldn't send him back down where it was probably better off for him. So if I'm doing the season review on Mauricio, it's more a season in review on the Mets' approach with Mauricio because I feel like they did him a disservice by keeping him up. I get why they did it and I understand it, but it just feels like next year he's going to start back down in Syracuse, and all that time missed where he could have been playing every day in a low-pressure environment and coming back off of the injury and rehabbing down there felt like it would have been a better use of his time this year.
I think I could say a lot of the same things about Luis Angel Acuna as well. Like him being a defensive replacement late legitimately won the Mets some games because of the plays he's able to make at second base. But as a hitter, like he looked like a second-year player who made his debut and looked good in some appearances in 2024. But once other teams got the tape on him and realized what he was not so good at hitting, he really struggled at the plate this year. A 65 WRC plus was the worst of any everyday Mets player this season. And so, I mean, not every day, but, relatively. And for Mauricio, I'm with you. Like, he's a guy that, with Beatty struggling and Vientos struggling, he was a guy that came up to mostly play third base as their new third baseman, and it just kind of felt like Beatty, and Vientos, for the early part of the season at least, were all just kind of doing different things well, and at the end of the season, Mauricio kind of ended up the odd man out, and I'm with you. I think he's a guy that will need some of that extra AAA development and seasoning before he can be considered among the young guys that should be considered to be everyday players.
Shortstop. There's one guy to talk about. It's Francisco Lindor. And The story for Lindor is a season in 3 parts. He finally got off to a good start of the year, had a 145 WRC plus in March and April, had a 122 WRC plus in May. It is the June and July where he was just AWOL, 76 and 77 WRC plus in both of those months, respectively. And then it was a hot end to the year. His best month in August put the team on his back, a 182 WRC plus, and then finished the year with a 156 WRC plus in September. A season in which he had over a 6 WAR, the third time in his Mets career that he's done it. Just for the record, he only did it twice in his run in Cleveland, so it's still a very productive, awesome player for the Mets and is doing things in his Mets tenure as he gets older that he never did early in his career with Cleveland. Defensively, was the second best Mets player on the defensive side after Luis Torrens, so he provided you that. I know he had the error problem early on in the year. He seemed to get over that, but yeah, an offensive season in 3 parts for Francisco Lindor, and it just seemed he had all those leadoff home runs, seemingly always came up in a big spot for the Mets and delivered. But it's that middle chunk. And, of course, when you look back at the Mets season and you look at that middle chunk of the year where they struggled, you can see it. It's written all over the data, all over the stats of where things went wrong.
Yeah, it's kind of a sign that where Lindor goes, this team goes. He had another 30-30 season, but the struggles that he had in June and July, like you said, were kind of a microcosm of the bigger issues that the Mets were facing as a team, with the lineup struggling for a lot of June and July, and the downturn that the team took in those months, I think is in part reflection of Lindor struggling as well in those months. Really encouraging to see him get over the slow starts to the season that he had in every year prior to this one with the Mets. I hope that he's able to take that into 2026. But, I mean, he still looked like the heart and soul of the team, regardless of Alonso coming back, regardless of Soto coming in, regardless of Nimmo being back as the longest tenured Met. Like, Lindor was the captain vibes of the team once again in 2025.
Third base, pair of guys to talk about, Brett Baty and Mark Vientos. Jack, I want to start with Brett because it's a career year for him. The first year he's hit double-digit home runs. The first year he had a WAR over .5, was worth 2.3 WAR. His first year with a WRC plus over 83 was his previous career high. He had a 111 this year. The defense was great. He got better as the season went along. The more playing time he got, it felt like the better he became for this team. And I think if you're looking at this position, again, we're just looking season in review, but it does feel like the player who put himself best in position to be the opening day third baseman next year.
Yeah, and it was almost like the reverse of what Mark Vientos was able to do for the Mets last year, where started the year as not necessarily a lock for the opening day roster or the lineup. Vientos was the guy for the Mets coming into the season that we thought was going to be the everyday third baseman because of the late season that he had, because of the postseason that he had. And then Brett Baty is able to come in about a month or two into the year and take that third base position. I know we said he had some games at second base as well, but from the defense to the power that started to come back, like, this was what we might have expected from Brett Baty getting a chance to play every day. And I think some of the on-again, off-again inconsistency in years past might have hampered him. If this is the Brett Baty that we're getting going forward, I am comfortable with him being the starting third baseman going forward. And I think that kind of leads us into the Vientos side of the season, Chris, which was, for my money, I talked about Shamanai being the biggest disappointment for the pitching staff. I think Mark Vientos was the biggest disappointment for this lineup.
Yeah, there's no other person that you expected so much of in 2025 and just missed that mark entirely. And it's funny because you say that, and you look up at the end of the year, and he almost hit 20 home runs, and he got his OPS over 700, and it wasn't a complete disaster the way it looked at times. He had a really strong finish to the year that kind of salvaged some of the back of the baseball card numbers. But this is a guy who hit 27 home runs the year prior, hit 266, was a superstar in the postseason, and just got nowhere close to that this year. And that's what's disappointing. When we talked about the 2025 Mets, we're like, yeah, they got Juan Soto. Yeah, they got Pete Alonso. They got Francisco Lindor. They have Brendan Nimmo. But they also have Mark Vientos. They also have Francisco Alvarez. These are the guys that are going to lengthen the lineup. And in both cases, in Alvarez and now, since we're talking Vientos here, they didn't get anywhere close to the player that we thought they were going to be when we talked about how deep this offense and this lineup could be. And I don't know what the future holds for Mark. I really don't. I think defensively he can't play third base, right? Same conversation with Pete over at first. You can't play him there. So he's a DH-only player. And the Mets have a lot of those guys, and I don't think they want to keep rostering guys who are very quickly going to become DH-only players. You mentioned it, I think, in an earlier episode that we did in this batch recording that we're doing about Juan Soto. I forget what episode it is. They're all blurring together at this point. We talked about with Pete earlier that he can't be the starting first baseman for this team. Defensively, he's a liability. The same goes for Mark. So Mets are really going to have to decide. We know defense is going to be a priority. If they're going to lean into it the way I think they're going to lean into it, then Mark Vientos doesn't have a role on this team other than being the DH, and that creates complications with what you want to do with Pete. But because he can't defend, his hitting's all over the place, it does feel like Mark's place on this team is non-existent if I had to look at it.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because when we say things like Brett Beatty seems to have locked up the starting third base position because of his abilities on both sides on offense and how well he performed at the plate this year, as well as defensively. He is clearly the much better option to Vientos at third base. And then we talked about Juan Soto is a guy that is not long for right field if the Mets really want to make improvements defensively, and that means he would be the full-time DH going forward because you can't take his bat out of the lineup ever. And when you look at what that leaves for Vientos, it's like maybe he can play some first base. He has a little bit of experience doing that if Pete is gone in 2026. But looking ahead, like there's not really a spot for him. And you don't really want to stick him in a situation like Mauricio or Acuna, which we talked about earlier, where it's like, yeah, you can maybe come off of the bench every once in a while and you're not going to be a defensive replacement. But if we need a pinch hitter in a big situation, that's just not really going to get all of the best that you could have gotten out of Vientos. And it's really unfortunate how slow his start to the season was. Even with his ability to recapture some of the end of season stats, there was not enough to give you confidence that he can be a third baseman and a member of the starting lineup really going forward.
Yeah, it's one of the many questions that a team that won only 83 games and missed the postseason are going to have to contemplate and answer here in the offseason. One more season recap episode for you later on this week. We will get to the outfielders. So, yes, we will get to Juan Soto's historic season at the end of this season recap series. In the meantime, please rate, review, subscribe to the podcast wherever you are listening to us. You want to watch the video version of the show, Jack McKessie on YouTube, MCKESSY is the place to be. We've got one more season recap for you, the outfielder. So Brendan Nimmo, Tyrone Taylor, Cedric Mullins, Juan Soto's historic year, all of it coming to you later on this week. Until then, let's go Mets.
Let's go Mets.